Japan is currently the third largest economy in the world, which is impressive considering it has been stagnant for 3.5 decades without sustained growth since the early 1990s. However, the fate of the Japanese economy contrasts with that of its capital, Tokyo, the largest and economically most powerful city in the world. This deviation highlights a real economic problem faced by all advanced economies, silently struggling. Tokyo, with a population of over 37 million people and a GDP exceeding $2 trillion, surpasses many countries. If it were its own country, it would rank as the 8th largest in the world, ahead of Italy and just behind Canada. This depends on how the borders of Tokyo are drawn, as the city has expanded into nearby metropolitan centers such as Chiba, Saitama, and Yokohama, forming what is now collectively known as the Greater Tokyo Area or Greater Canton Metropolitan Area. Japan and Tokyo may be the most obvious examples, but this phenomenon is occurring everywhere and is likely to worsen in the coming decade. The inequality between rural areas and select cities could become one of the most powerful forces against sustained economic growth, similar to what is happening in Japan. Beyond GDP figures, this situation can lead to social problems when people feel compelled to live in expensive and overcrowded cities just to remain part of the thriving economy. While some individuals enjoy the lifestyle of living in large metropolises, it also comes with drawbacks. So why is the inequality between large cities and rural areas an economic problem? It goes beyond what is commonly thought. Additionally, what can be done to solve these problems? Once addressed, Tokyo might become less relevant in the increasingly competitive national economic rankings explained by different regions having different income levels. The inequality between large cities and rural areas is not necessarily a problem for the overall economy. Some areas are more expensive to live in, but host industries that maximize worker productivity. If people earn more but spend more for the same quality of goods and services, the situation tends to balance out. Economists often adjust production figures using something called purchasing power parity to explain this discrepancy. In a simplified example, suppose two economies only produce wheat, each producing 1 million tons per year and having the same population. The first economy sells its wheat for $400 per ton, with each worker earning $10,000 per year. The second, more expensive economy sells its wheat for $600 per ton and pays its workers $15,000 per year to compensate for the higher prices they will pay for goods. In this theoretical single-product economy, the first would have a nominal GDP of $400 million, and the second would have a nominal GDP of $600 million. However, are they truly different in terms of size, wealth, or prosperity? Adjusting GDP for purchasing power parity, using the United States as a reference, comes into play. If the cost of goods and services in an economy is lower than in the United States, its GDP will be adjusted upward for purchasing power parity, and vice versa. China's nominal GDP in 2021 is $17.7 trillion, but because most goods and services in China are cheaper than in the United States, they get much more for those $17.7 trillion. Adjusted for purchasing power parity, China's total production was $27.3 trillion in the same year. Adjusting economic figures to measure a country's true production beyond the cost of things is crucial for understanding the economy. This is because the economy involves providing valuable things to people, and it's not always as simple as it seems. Most GDP figures are nominal, especially for economists, especially those in international macroeconomics. They are not lazy about adjusting purchasing power parity because our figures are more useful when economies interact with each other. The problem arises if these economies want to trade with each other or if people want to move between those two regions. If these economies are sovereign nations with barriers like tariffs, import and export taxes, and migration controls preventing movement between countries, then such adjustments are less critical. However, if these economies are different regions of the same nation, most of these barriers disappear. Large cities like Tokyo are home to jobs that, on average, pay more than those in rural areas and smaller centers. When talking about inequality between large cities and the rest of the world, it's not just about farms in the countryside. It also involves smaller cities and towns that could still host 1 million people. People earn more in these megacities, but it's also more expensive to live there. However, this means residents can buy more goods and services from the country, that are not region-specific. A car doesn't cost more just because it's bought in the city center. And other expenses besides housing are less inflated than salaries. The economic problem this causes is that moving to Tokyo or any other major city becomes very challenging unless you already live there. It also discourages people from leaving cities because it can be challenging to return, exacerbating affordability issues. The great cities, like Sydney, tend to be home to intelligent people, schools, and businesses, serving as major engines of innovation. Sharing talent and ideas is much easier when people are close. If people can't afford to move to these cities, it can have negative consequences for both the national and global economies, potentially missing out on innovations. The inequality between cities and rural areas also accelerates another problem faced by many advanced economies: population aging. While cities are excellent places to promote technological innovation for long-term economic growth, they are not ideal places to have children. Birth rates in large cities are lower than in rural areas of the same countries. Many people move out of large cities when they want to start a family because buying a sufficiently large house to raise children is incredibly expensive. People still do it, but it often means living in cramped conditions, which is not ideal for parents or children. Moving to surrounding suburban regions is an option for workers who want to participate in the high value-added industries that large cities host. However, this leads to what urban planners call urban sprawl, where low-density housing spreads further from the city center, requiring exponentially more transport infrastructure and longer commute times. Over time, homes outside become as expensive as appropriately sized homes in the city itself. Thus, an increasing part of the population is forced to choose between leaving the city and the opportunities it offers to start a family, making significant sacrifices in quality of life to do so, or ultimately deciding not to start a family at all. In 2023, several videos were highlighted, emphasizing the importance of young workers joining the workforce to replace older workers who are retiring. The declining birth rate in advanced economies is not solely because people are getting richer. It's also because richer economies focus on cities, and cities are challenging and expensive places to raise children. This is the macroeconomics of the issue, and the impact it will have on long-term growth has a very real human cost. Most people want to start a family if it is economically viable, but it's not in many large cities. Due to the inequality between these cities and rural areas, it's also not viable for many people to live elsewhere. If population aging is an economic threat, and the slowing of innovation could cost trillions to the global economy, both issues can be traced back to the problem of inequality between large cities and the rest of the world. It can be addressed, and the solutions don't have to negatively impact the economy. There will always be industries that pay more and more desirable places to live. No sensible policy can change this reality without generating negative consequences for the economy. However, these two things don't have to be linked. Today, more than ever, there is less need for workers to be physically located in the same city or country where they work. Creating policies that encourage remote work and incentivizing companies to offer it as an option will reduce the demand for housing in concentrated industrial areas. It will also reduce the demand for transport infrastructure, as fewer people will need to commute daily in and out of the city center. A short-term negative side effect might be an increase in housing demand in regional areas, creating social problems as workers from higher-income cities drive up prices in the places they move to. This could create the same kind of housing unaffordability problems that economists were trying to solve by getting people out of concentrated metropolises in the first place. Housing prices include the cost of other goods and services. If a restaurant has to pay double the rent, it passes that expense on to its customers. However, in the macroeconomic long-term view, this could be positive. If prices of goods and services decrease in megacities and increase in the rest, the gap between the two economic regions will decrease and social mobility will increase for people who want to move in or out. Another thing policymakers can do to reduce the impact of this economic trend is to build high-quality, high-density housing around these megacities. Increasing the housing supply will reduce its costs. If managed well, these areas can become more suitable for families, alleviating the birth rate issue typical in advanced economies focused on cities. Unfortunately, these solutions are not new. Most economists dealing with these problems suggest that promoting remote work and building affordable housing will alleviate the issues caused by regional inequality. However, enacting these policies is much easier said than done. People like the idea of affordable housing until it affects their own homes. Local residents often oppose reclassification and high-density developments in desirable areas near cities. Local governments, catering to residents from large cities, will also have to explain to their voters why they feel like they're losing the value of their own homes. These steps are challenging to take, and no one wants to take them. Yet ultimately, they will have to be taken. Otherwise, metropolises that have been the driving force behind global economic growth will gradually become a dead weight slowing that growth down. This brings us back to Tokyo, the largest city in the world, whose economy surpasses all nations. It's essential to see where it ranks in the national economic classification, explained by different regions having different income levels. Starting with size, estimates of Tokyo's production vary because it's challenging to measure things like imports and exports in a city with no formal controls over what enters and exits, as with goods entering a country. It also depends on where the increasingly blurry borders of Tokyo are drawn. According to credible organizations, estimates place it between $1.5 and $2.2 trillion, making it one of the world's largest national economies. If it were a sovereign state, the city would represent 2.2% of global production, earning it an 8 out of 10. Per capita GDP is also impressive, given that megacities like Tokyo host highly productive industries. The per-person production is about $60,000 annually in this metropolis, 50% higher than the national average, even if less productive areas of the city are included. This still places Tokyo slightly below the national average of the United States, but it's a notably high reference, earning it an 8 out of 10. Stability and confidence are high in Tokyo. When people think of Asian business centers, they think of Singapore, Hong Kong, and Tokyo. While Tokyo may be far from its speculative peak in the 80s and 90s, the slow and steady new approach has made it a more stable economy, earning it an 8 out of 10. Growth is difficult to measure due to limited organizations tracking city production, especially over time. According to OECD estimates and Visuals figures, there was a growth rate of around 3%, perfectly average for an advanced economy of that size, which is impressive given Japan's overall economic stagnation. Tokyo scores a 5 out of 10 for growth. Lastly, Tokyo hosts world-leading companies, an enormous pool of labor talent, and combines all this with a good reputation for producing high-quality goods and services, and conducting business openly and honestly. If Tokyo were a country, it would be impressive in this category. As a city, it's simply astonishing, earning it an 8 out of 10. In total, Tokyo scores an average of 7.4 out of 10, placing it just behind its home country in the economic classification table. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a comment. Also, please consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it. Thanks.